was that?
New England, I think.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hour is 7 o'clock. As mayor, I hereby call to order this special budget meeting of Laconia City Council scheduled for June 18, 2018 at this hour. We'll begin tonight's meeting with a salute to our American flag. I would ask that you please rise and join Councilor Mark Haynes in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by City Clerk Cheryl Hebert, and I would ask that she please call the roll.
Councilor Cheney.
Here.
Councilor Bounds.
Counselor
Whitman.
Counselor
Here.
Bounds is not here this evening.
Thank you. Councilor Haynes.
Here.
Councilor Hamel.
Here.
Councilor Hosmer.
Counselor Hosmer is not here this evening.
Mayor Engler.
Mayor Engler is here this evening. Thank you. So let the record show that 4 counselors are present tonight and a quorum has been established for this meeting. There's really only 2 pieces of business on the agenda tonight. We're going to start out with a series of legally required public hearings, all related to the fiscal 2019 budget. And then after we're through with that, we have scheduled a general budget discussion. This is the time of the year when the counselors put forward any changes they would like to see in the budget that was submitted by the city manager a couple months ago. And I would also say that it looks to me, and obviously you, the council, have the final say on this, but it looks to me like we are headed for a July 11th approval of the budget. Primary reason for that being that Councilor Hosmer will not be back until then for that meeting, and would like to make every effort to be able to have him participate in the budget, the final budget discussions and whatnot, or have that opportunity. So the way I see this developing is we'll have public input tonight if there is any. At our next meeting, which is a regular meeting, we'll schedule into the agenda a budget discussion so that if there are any last minute changes, corrections, or whatever, we can do it on the 25th. The hope is that by the end of the meeting on the 25th, we will have the budget pretty well outlined in detail and agree on it. That would give the staff a couple of weeks to get all the resolutions caught up and the detail work so that when we get to the 25th, while we could still make changes on the 25th, we'll have the final, ideally have the final budget resolutions ready to vote on the 25th. So that's sort of the way I see this happening. One more thing, if I could go. So one of the things I'd like to advise the council tonight is if we keep to that timetable, if there's somebody you would like to have at the meeting on the 25th to provide input that you would like to hear from a department head or whomever, say that tonight so that the manager can make plans to have those people that you would like to have back, if any, join us again next week on the 25th to discuss a particular part of the budget. And then lastly tonight, we have need for a so-called non-meeting after our regular meeting is over to discuss union contract negotiations. And for the public sake, non-meeting is just a euphemism. Under New Hampshire law, public bodies such as ours are allowed to meet privately without a record being kept under certain conditions, one of which is to discuss negotiating positions on union contracts. So that's euphemistically called a non-meeting because it is not legally a meeting of the council and is not subject to the state open meetings law. So that'll be the last thing. Anyway, Councilor Ham.
The only thing I would like to do, you mentioned the meeting in July as
July 11th, and it's the
Is that
9th.
wrong?
It's the 9th.
The 9th, I'm sorry. Okay, July 9th. Thank you for correcting that. I need to note for the record also, for the minutes, that the council is joined at the head table tonight by City Manager Scott Myers and by our City Finance Director Donna Woodeman. Okay, public hearings. We have, what, 9? Is that the appropriate number that we need to wade through? So the first public hearing tonight is relevant to Resolution 2018-15, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the general fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018, and terminating June 30, 2019. A notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and the SAU office. So I'm going to declare this public hearing open at 7:06 p.m. And for those of you in our audience tonight, advise that this is the general budget resolution. So this covers 90-something% of the total city budget, and probably almost anything that the public would have a significant interest in. The other 8 resolutions we need to pass tonight are largely, what do we want to call them, housekeeping resolutions, because there are other funds we need to approve an official budget for, but there are things like TIF district budgets and motorcycle week and things like that. So the vast majority of city spending is covered by this very first resolution. So I suspect that if any of you are here tonight to offer testimony, it's probably on this Resolution 15. So as I said, the floor is now open for anyone who would like to offer comment to the City Council with regard to the general fund budget proposal. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Gerald Bourgeois.
Can you come to the microphone, please? And for the record, if you will tell us your name and what ward or street you live on?
Sure. I'm Jerry Bourgeois, and I live up in the Taylor community at Fort Kinsman Drive, and I'm currently writing the history of the Laconia Fire Department. I did the Concord Fire Department 2 years ago, and I'm now doing the Laconia Fire Department. But you may think I'm a firefighter, and yes, I have been, as a volunteer, and I was a fire commissioner down in Massachusetts of a major city. But I'm an educator by trade. I've been a middle school principal, a superintendent of schools, and I was the deputy commissioner of education here in New Hampshire, and so forth and so on. The first thing I want to talk about tonight is Chief Canfield, who now is here. And when I was here at a council meeting about 3 weeks ago, he presented his police budget for the upcoming year. And one of the things that he mentioned was putting a resource officer at the middle school. And I just want to tell you that as far as I'm concerned, that should be a priority. Some of you may say, well, you know, high school is one thing, but middle school is something else. Well, I go back to the 70s and the 80s, and I've been involved ever since that particular time at the middle level education. And I became a spokesman and a school safety person nationally, and I've written articles in national magazines and so forth and so on. And it is a real need to have someone like that at the middle school level. The environment is changing. As a matter of fact, after that meeting where this was talked about, there was a middle school shooting less than a week later out in the Midwest. And the only thing that saved people being killed was the teacher in the classroom jumped up from his desk over the person who was shooting to prevent him from shooting anybody else. He did, in fact, wound 2 students in the classroom, but because that teacher did the right thing, he prevented other people from being shot and maybe even killed. And I've done my research in terms of middle school tragedies, and I can assure you they have occurred over the last several years all over the United States. There has not been one that has killed 17 or 23 people, but I can assure you there have been some that have badly injured several students or several members of the faculty and so forth and so on. And from a positive point of view, forgetting the shootings and the negative, from a positive point of view, a good resource officer, and I've also been to resource training activities, by the way, a resource officer activity, and they really can interact with these students at a very critical time. Life has changed. Drugs used to be at the high school. Drugs are now even in the elementary schools, in this country's schools, and the middle school is a key place to work with these kids as they're starting to think about those kinds of things. And with all that has been going on, I just think that if the chief can figure out a way to do it, it should be done. And as far as the cost goes, yes, I know it costs money. And obviously, as a former superintendent of schools, I had to face people every single year doing a budget. I was a superintendent here over in the SAU 48 district, which includes Plymouth and Holderness and Rumney and all those towns. I had 9 school districts, by the way, at that point in time. And I had to go to 9 town financial meetings every single year for the 8 years that I was there. So I know it's not an easy task, all right? I understand that. And if something can be worked out between the police department and the school system for even sharing the cost, that wouldn't bother me, quite honestly. And I don't know why anybody would really argue against that, quite honestly. If the police department budget can actually hold it all, that's fine. But in the end, it's all coming out of the same taxpayer. No matter whose district budget it is, it's still coming from the same people's contacts. So I just want to tell you that I think it's very important that you think about that one very carefully and hope you will give it some kind of positive comment. Lastly, I want to say that obviously, also having a firefighter background and doing the current history, I want to tell you, I hope there's no more discussion about who keeps the ambulance service. My experience in the fighting field tells me that it should remain with the Laconia Fire Department. And my basic reason for that is you get people who can do more than one thing. And, you know, you may think, well, 9 firefighters is too much for this city. Well, based on my experience, I can tell you it is not too much. Even if they didn't do the ambulance service, 9 firefighters is not too much when you consider the numbers of various things they have to do and how long they have been doing it. And as you know, historically, you know the first ambulance service in the city, you know who ran the first ambulance service? Anybody know?
Wilkinson Bean?
That's correct. That's correct. Back in the old days, they got $5 a time, $5. And then about halfway through their time doing it, they got raised to $10. And their first contract was just to respond to fire alarms. And the purpose wasn't to go to accidents or anything. The purpose was to just protect firefighters who might get injured. That was the first system. You know the second system? It was a private ambulance service.
Forest Park.
Forest Park. That is correct. And that lasted 10 years. And then they decided to go with the fire department after that. And then came the very unique system between LRGH and the city and the fire department, obviously.
That was an RFP proposal.
You know, yeah, you know, and as a matter of fact, a former fire chief was on the city council at that time when that happens. That was an interesting deal, you know. You don't usually get former fire chiefs sitting on a city council, but that worked out fine. And he had a lot of questions, by the way, too. And the record is very clear on that. So I just want to let you know that I'm another person, and I wrote you a letter, by the way, and I know some of you didn't like getting a lot of letters, but that's okay, you know. So I just want to, you know, that I support those 2 issues. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for coming.
Could I
Have a question?
Go ahead.
Did you read the proposal by the private ambulance service?
To the best of my knowledge, I've never seen it, no.
It's
And
online.
Huh?
It's online.
Oh, well, nobody told me that. quite honestly.
I would hope you'd at least look at it.
I'd be happy to.
Okay,
I'm not opposed to private ambulance services as a general comment, all right? I am not opposed to them. But I think in this case, the best deal, and I think the chief has pretty well informed you based on what I heard 3 weeks ago, that it can be done at a good cost. That's all I'm saying.
But without reading the proposal, you can't be sure.
Yeah, I can be sure.
Okay.
I've already made the comment about 9 firefighters being on duty no matter whether you do the ambulance service or not.
I don't think that was part of the discussion, but.
Yeah, well, I don't know, but I kind of know how things go usually. But anyway, okay. Any other questions? Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to offer testimony on the general fund budget proposal? Okay, if not, I'm going to declare this public hearing closed at 7:16 and repeat that this item will remain on our agenda and with final disposal scheduled at this time for July 9th, this budget resolution. Next up, we have a public hearing relative to Resolution 16, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for grants for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and the SAU office. Is there anyone here tonight who wishes to address the council on Resolution 16, which is relative to appropriations for grants for the next fiscal year? I'll open that hearing at 7:16 and close the hearing at 7:16 also. Next up, we have Resolution 17, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the sewer fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and the SAU office. I'll open this hearing at 7:17 and ask if there's anyone here tonight who wishes to address the council with regard to Resolution 17, appropriations for the sewer fund. Nobody, so I'll close that public hearing at 7:17 as well. Next up is Resolution 18, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the water fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, Community Center, Laconia Public Library, and the SAU office. I'll open this public hearing at 7:18 p.m. and ask if anyone here tonight would like to comment to the City Council about Resolution 18, the appropriation for the water fund. No one, so I'll declare that public hearing closed at 7:18 p.m. as well. And we'll move on to Resolution 19, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the Internal Services Fund for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30th, July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and the SAU office. I will open this hearing to the public at 7:19 p.m. and ask if there is anyone present tonight who would like to speak to the City Council relative to Resolution 19 having to do with the Internal Services Fund. No, I'll close that hearing then at 7:19 p.m. as well. And move on to Resolution 20. A resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the Special Revenue Fund for Motorcycle Week for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of the public hearing. This public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, at the Community Center, the Laconia Public Library, and the SAU office. I'll open this public hearing at 7:20 PM and ask if there's anyone in attendance tonight who would like to speak to the city council relative to the Resolution 20, the Special Revenue Fund for Motorcycle Week. No one? All right, I will declare that public hearing closed at 7:20 PM, and we will move on to Resolution number 21, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the Special Revenue Fund Ambulance Emergency Medical Services for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and the SAU office. I will declare this public hearing open at 7:21 PM and ask if there is anyone with us tonight who would like to speak to the City Council regarding the Special Revenue Fund budget for ambulance emergency medical services. No, I'll close that public hearing as well at 7:21, and we'll move on to Resolution 22, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the tax increment financing district for the downtown area for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, at the Community Center, at the Public Library, and at the SAU office. I will open this public hearing at 7:21 PM and ask if there is anyone who wishes to address the council relative to Resolution 22 having to do with the appropriation for the tax increment financing district for the downtown area. Nobody? I'll close that public hearing at 7:22 PM. We'll move on to Resolution 23, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the tax increment financing district for Lakeport for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice of this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at Laconia City Hall, at the Community Center, the Public Library, and at the SAU office. I'll open this public hearing at 7:22 PM and ask if there is anyone in attendance tonight who would like to offer testimony to the council regarding the tax increment financing district budget for Lakeport. No one, so I will close this public hearing at 7:23 PM, and we will move on to the final resolution in this series, which is number 24, a resolution relative to making itemized appropriations for the tax increment financing district for the Weirs for the fiscal year beginning July 1, 2018 and terminating June 30, 2019. Notice for this public hearing was made in the June 5, 2018 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Community Center, the Public Library, and at the SAU office. I will open this public hearing at 7:23 PM and ask if there's anyone in attendance tonight who would like to address the council on Resolution 24, the budget for the budget proposal for the tax increment financing district covering the Weirs. No one, so I will declare this public hearing closed at 7:24 PM. Now that concludes the 9 public hearings we're required to hold on the budget. Okay, we are on to general budget discussion. As I said at the top, the purpose of our meeting tonight, traditionally, for those of you who are new to the council, is this is the night we set aside for councilors to get out on the table any changes they would like to suggest or propose to the budget proposal put forward by the city manager. And the way we typically work on that, although there's no rule against someone making a formal motion, we try to develop a sense of whether or not there's enough support on the council to make it likely that that would pass in the end, a particular proposal. And if enough support is expressed or lack of objection is suggested for that change, that gives the city manager directive to fine tune those numbers and build them into the budget proposal leading to our next discussion. So if you suggest something and, there's either lack of objection to it on the part of your fellow counselors or endorsement on the part of your fellow counselors, it'll make this first cut, so to speak, on changes, and we'll move on to next week's meeting. If there is not that support voiced, or if a majority is in opposition, you can make a formal motion if you'd like to have a formal vote on that. You're certainly entitled to do that. But it would, if there isn't support for that, in effect, it would not make the cut and would not advance to the next round, so to speak. Okay? Counselor Whitman?
Before we get underway, can ask a couple of questions for level setting, just to understand a couple of points.
Go ahead.
So, on page 2 of the budget, the bottom,
What page are you on?
page 2 of the budget book, the green budget. In terms of our confidence level, in terms of the assessed valuation, we typically, probably not at this point, have an updated number to that, but how far away from that calculation estimate?
Preliminary numbers will probably be ready around September 1st. Obviously, we track it through sales and updates, but the assessing year just ended March 31st. They're starting to pull together all of that data from the prior 12 months. So we feel confident that the value increase that reflected the new construction due to building permits would come in. As the council will recall from last year, we also saw just growth within the overall real estate market, and that brought that number in higher. As you've heard me say a lot, and I'll say it again, the tax rate really means nothing. So if you end up with higher assessments, that it means everyone's got more thousands in valuation. That can cause the tax rate to drop, but what we really should be focused on is what the tax bill is. But we're comfortable that we're going to hit that number. If I had to look in the crystal ball, I would say the assessments might come in a little bit higher than that, but
I guess sort of two things, just from the individual taxpayer standpoint, that if there's more value added, it can reduce what you're actually paying.
It
Because-
can, and as we spoke last year, the different classifications of property
Right.
sometimes will move differently. So if you're in a property ownership that has strong
Understood.
value, then you may see a larger share than someone who's in a property class that doesn't have that much growth.
On the same page, so I guess your conclusion is you wouldn't vary from the number that you have on the third column manager, fourth one.
No, I'm comfortable where we are. Again, if I had to guess, I may come in a touch higher than that, but I'm not anticipating we're going to see a significant overage what we had last year.
For our audience's sake, I will mention that the number being referred to is the manager's projection that the total taxable, amount of taxable property in the city for this budget will be $2,085,841,475. So 2.1 billion is rounded off.
And the note on adjusted no utilities, can you explain that footnote and the legislation that passed around utilities? Is that related to that?
It's not related to that. When all communities calculate their tax rates with the Department of Revenue Administration, you've got the municipal piece, the county component, and two portions of the education tax, one being a local portion, one being a state portion. And when you factor in the tax bill for utilities, utilities pay 3 of those 4 components, but they don't pay the state education component. So we look at our entire assessment citywide, and we factor that on all 4 components, and then you back out the utility valuation separately, and there's a formula in there where the utilities only pay valuation on 3 components. They don't pay it on the state education tax. So that's why that is separated out. It's nothing different than we're doing here than any other community is doing across the state.
In terms of the principal and interest forecast on page 54 of the
Which page?
54 of the budget book.
54.
In terms of the planned borrowings and interest rates rising a little bit, are we comfortable with what we have in here for expenses?
Yes, we are, and actually, we've gone out with, based on seeing some positive response to the city borrowing the $2.5 million from the city council. I had asked Donna Woodham, our finance director, to go out and solicit bids for that dollar amount right now, with the caveat that those bids, those submittals, hold until after the fourth Monday in June, July, so at least through July 23rd, so we know, and we've got several responses, and
They're holding until August 1st.
holding till August 1st for us for the rate that they're submitting now. And have we, has the deadline closed? or-
Tomorrow's the
So
deadline.
tomorrow's the deadline, so I don't want to release any rates, but I will say that we have had several responses, and we are solid, I think, with projections that we're making for that particular issuance.
So you can update us if we have savings or in that category.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, again, you're only dealing with a half years of interest only in year one in this, so it's not a huge number to begin with. It's a little under $35,000, so I'm not expecting significant savings, but I think it's in line with projections, and I'm not expecting any negative surprises in where the numbers are going to come in.
And on page 11,
It's the 700 for the,
We were talking, we've gone out for two different numbers. I'm sorry, so I misspoke. So the 2.5 we hadn't gone out on, which would be a 10-year when we do it. We have gone out on the 700,000 for the radio tower and dispatch upgrades to that. So that's the numbers that we're holding on that I think are coming in very favorably. Based on where those numbers are on a 7-year, I would also expect that the estimates we've used going on the 10-year for the street will also be in line with our expectations. So I apologize for that. Thank Donna for correcting me.
you get a start on it. On the capital outlays and carry forwards, page 11, in terms of, as we look at what we're spending in capital, it's within almost a couple $100,000 of what we're spending in this current year. Do you have a sense of what might be carried forward, if anything significant on, is there anything in streets or drainage improvements or sort of the infrastructure type things?
Yeah, we've been compiling that preliminary list. It was going to be on next week's agenda, so we do have several $100,000 in streets. There is probably anywhere from, in these various categories I'll list next, there's probably anywhere from $25,000 to $75,000 in categories like sidewalks, retaining walls, and guardrails type of stuff, in drainage improvements. So any of those capital items collectively, we know that there's a need for those dollars to be carried forward. So we probably just in the street, sidewalk, drainage type of improvements, and maybe some of the money that we're going into bridge engineering, I say we're probably going to be in the area of $600,000 to $700,000 as a carry forward for those items. There are some smaller ones that will carry forward for Wyatt Park Playground, for Milfoil, and those types of things. So collectively, we might be in the $700,000 to $800,000 range with all carry forwards that we'd be focusing on for capital type of projects.
So our spending in 18 and 19 will be at least equal to or greater than 17 and 18.
Yes, we typically have a threshold of carry forwards that come through because they're still needed, and maybe all the projects didn't wrap up in a fiscal year they were targeted for. But yes, we've got those dollars plus newly issued dollars to come in. Some of these newly issued dollars typically will carry and be able to start our spring construction season of next year. So they will not all be spent between July 1 or whenever the budget is adopted and when the construction season wraps up in November for this year. We do carry an allotment over so that come April, we can start with spring projects as well.
Go ahead.
One last one. On the middle school resource officer, did we submit our application for that?
I followed up with the chief after the meeting and shared with him the council guidance. He followed up in I think a day or two later, and if I get this wrong, chief, please let me know, but said due to a legal challenge in the state of California, there's been a freeze put on on those particular grants right now, pending clarification of something in the court system. So it's not that we can't get the application in, it's that they stopped accepting and put a freeze on even accepting them right now until they clarify this, and in which case they'll come forward and open up the process to complete it again. So based on the guidance, we will still intend to do that. I don't have a date certain as to when that process will begin again. Is that accurate? Okay.
Okay, who's next? Counselor Cheney.
Mayor, first I'd ask a question. The fact that we can't do a grant doesn't mean we couldn't fund that position.
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to propose that the council instruct the, I'd like to propose that the council instruct the police commission, in the case of the police department, and the manager in the case of the fire department, to come up with a proposal for using funds from their regular salaries account to encourage, in the case of the police department, certified police officers, which I think would be a substantial savings to the city over training costs. And the same thing with the fire department for experienced firefighters. A proposal to say, this is how much we think we should propose or to give as a bonus to hiring a certified officer or an experienced firefighter, and bring that back to the council for our review. But I'd like to encourage that we give them the ability to use those funds of unfilled positions to fund a hiring bonus. Am I making any sense?
So I guess what this would be asking the administration to develop a resolution that would accomplish that. Probably might be two resolutions because we have different responsibilities over the fire department than we do with the police department in terms of chain of command. But we could, and just for the sake of the counselors to broaden the conversation just slightly here, I see the need as we get to finalizing the budget for what the legislature would call a trailer bill, in effect. And we're not talking about a bill here, but the introduction of resolutions like the one that's being suggested by Councilor Cheney that would be in effect a supplement to the budget that offers operational direction the city council wants to direct certain expenditures and whatnot, or lack of expenditures to that. In other words, they'd be budget-related resolutions that we would pass at the same time we pass the budget on July 9th. So we need to get them drafted and worry about the wording and whatnot between now and then. But we've not done that in the past that I'm aware of, but it seems like we're likely to have the need for that this year. In other words, a resolution the council could pass that directs certain encouragements or prohibitions about parts, how money in the budget can or would be spent. So in this case, it's an encouragement. Councilor Cheney is saying that we would like to encourage the police commission and the fire chief and the city manager to develop systems that would, in the police department case, wouldn't come back to us because once we approve the bottom line,
That's fine.
they can do whatever they want, but it would be to encourage them to consider spending part of their salary budget on bonuses for certified police officers joining the force, correct?
Correct.
And in the fire department case, I'm assuming that would come back to the council as interpreted.
So the bonus is for I'll call them a seasoned employee to come on board with us. It's not a referral fee or a recruitment fee for someone bringing them. If someone came on board, they would get a bonus if they've already credentialed.
If the police commission or you and the fire chief thought that a referral bonus for finding an experienced firefighter or a certified police officer was appropriate, I would certainly support that as well.
But you're looking at it for the new applicant coming in upon successful completion of the interview process and hiring, there could be a bonus for someone who already have experience on the job coming to work in the city.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
What about before we leave this subject, anyone else want to comment on that proposal?
Yeah, I would. I think that's a good idea. When I was at the police academy for the training this spring, I know that the state police were actually offering a $5,000 hiring bonus. And that was, you don't even have to be seasoned. They were just looking
Yes.
for people, never mind seasoned people. I think that's a good idea, that as far as if there's positions not filled and there's that money that's accumulating, and an officer that's been through the academy or a fireman that's been through training or whatever, offered that amount of money. Plus, we're also looking into something else with insurances and stuff that, you know, I think that would be enticing to get people here. And it would actually help the bottom line a lot if you don't send someone to the academy.
And in the long haul, it will save us
Yeah.
training costs, significant
You know, I
training
mean,
costs.
they would have to do FTO training for a certain amount of weeks to, you know, learn the neighborhood and the
But
local rules.
not 16 weeks
not-
at the academy. and-
Exactly,
yeah.
yeah.
Counselor Haynes is nodding.
With that.
Counselor Lippman?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we have to let the administrations design them in a way that
Yeah.
has the positive effect, but we're basically saying that working within the existing budget allocations to do so.
Yeah, and I think they have already have a contract that we were shown as far as the retainment of that person. They have to be here so long or whatever. I mean, that should be part of that too.
Okay, so we have a directive there to develop resolution language that would accomplish that. And we'll look at the first draft of that at our next meeting. Okay. Who's next? Counselor Hamel.
Yeah, I've got two things. One was just brought up by the city manager, and that involves the police microwave towers that we're looking to do and to fund, and it's been being funded for the last several years. I was wondering if city manager could give us some kind of update of, you know, where we are. You know, I brought up about using fiber optics, you know, if that's feasible, not feasible, if we should check into a price or just go with the microwave towers. So I think it would help if the city council as a whole could be brought up to date on that.
Well, thank you. I don't have a whole lot new to update since we kind of presented the approach, I don't know if it was last meeting or 2 meetings ago. But again, we've got two different systems. With the fire system, it's analog, and again, I'm going to defer to Councilor Cheney as my communications expert here to correct any missteps. But the police on a digital, there's a definite need to upgrade the police communication system in the city. They're dealing with, you know, copper wire and failures, and we need definitely to upgrade that. At the same time, there would be an extra antenna signal being boosted from Meredith Bay project, so we've got extra coverage out past pedal pushers up to the Weirs end of the city. We're talking about improving with another communications signal from the hospital. There's room on all of these to not only handle fire transmittals as well, but in the future, when we need to upgrade Public Works for dispatch, there is space kind of in a plug-and-play within the box, if you will, to improve Public Works communications. So two different systems, both are going to be Motorola products. And there are two Motorola entities, approved entities in the state that deal with communications through an arrangement with Motorola. For whatever reasons in the past, the fire department has dealt with one, the police department has dealt with the other, but they're both under the Motorola umbrella for the products, the services, the pricing, the contracts, those types of things. Going forward, it would be our intent to only work with one of the entities, so we have one contractor we're working with who does all of the installation as opposed to splitting it with two. We did have a meeting where we had not only the local representative from Ossipee Mountain Electronics here, but we also had a Motorola Corporation representative here as well. The process works that the layout for the design and engineer is done locally. It is then reviewed by Motorola Corporate to make sure that what's designed, they're comfortable is going to function as it's done. Make sure pricing, make sure everything is sound in how the system is put together, and that it ties in with the bid prices on it as well. We've also talked about having some backup capacity so that if a microwave, which isn't foolproof, fails to work, that we've got some backup. And I think, Counselors, through simulcasting is the process with that. And then also within that scope is an encrypted police channel, because there are a number of very easy to download phone apps right now that allow you to monitor what's going on and hear everything that is happening over police radios right now. So the ability for the police department to be able to turn to an encrypted channel is important in sensitive areas. Additionally, this would be upgrading the entire dispatch center at the police station, which we've been informed that Motorola is no longer supporting that product. It has outlived its life, and even right now, replacement parts are very, very hard to come by, where our vendor encouraged Laconia PD to buy some parts just to put them away because they couldn't guarantee that until we upgraded, they would have the ability to source out replacement parts. So this is the upgrade to the dispatch as well. We figure all of this is bringing us up to a extremely current standard, and we expect that the life cycle of the technology that we're going for to change to is probably easily at a minimum of 10 years, if not 15 years. And whatever we're doing, especially on the fire side of the operation, would be compatible with whatever upgrades are being done at Lakes Region Mutual Aid with the dispatch there, as Lakes handles the regional fire dispatch, because the last upgrade there they may have done 5, 6, 7 years ago. So their next upgrade we will be compatible with as well. So we think it's a very solid package with backup capabilities, meets our needs now and for the foreseeable future on a number of fronts, and we think that funding it through the 7 or 10-year bond, as I spoke to you about a couple of weeks ago, makes the numbers work and gets us where we need to be today. And I certainly will defer to Councilor Cheney for anything additional.
I don't know if it's additional. I would only say two things. One, I think the project is important and should go forward. The second thing I would say is I don't have a preference for OSIP or the other, I think it's two-way communications, the two Motorola reps. I don't have a preference there. I do have a preference to see only one contractor. For those of us who were around when AT&T broke up, and you watched the phone company blame the regional carrier, and the regional carrier blame the guy who sold you the equipment, and arrows going in every direction, it's not my fault. At least if you have one contractor, you know who to call. And I think the fire department, the police department rather, has had some of those problems recently where problems occur and the phone company saying it's not our stuff, and the equipment manufacturer saying, no, it's the phone lines, not the equipment. It'd be nice to have one contractor responsible for all of that.
And if I could add one more thing, so if the council is still supportive of that, that will be one shift you see in the resolution, because that item will come out of the capital cash budget, where you saw it listed as us continuing to put $100,000, and we would shift that over towards the debt finance. Then we would use at that point, the $300,000 that was built up toward the project and finance the rest over either a 7 or a 10-year period. So if there is support for that, we will shift that over to be the debt finance project.
Since we're looking at upgrading the dispatch center, could we have discussions with the county they have their own dispatch center. They do other towns after a certain hour and that kind of stuff. Could we have discussions with them because we're always looking to regionalize things, of maybe combining them, and instead of having 1 or 2 miles up the road, we could combine them together. Their dispatch people would come here and work here. If we're looking to do this now, to me, that would be a good opportunity to have discussion with them. because I think their equipment is old also over there. I don't know when the last time it's been upgraded, but I think there was talk in the past of upgrading, but they didn't have the funds to do it. So maybe it would be a good time to have a discussion about that.
We can certainly have it. Are you talking about the county dispatch having discussion with Lakes Region Mutual Fire Aid, or county having a conversation with our police dispatch?
With our police dispatch.
I-
The sheriff's dispatch office and our dispatch having a
I
discussion
will certainly,
of combining the two.
yeah, I know Chief Canfield is here, so certainly between us, we can have that conversation. I can't speak to any of that status right now, but we will certainly engage in a conversation about future opportunities.
Yeah. I mean, when it comes time to do it, it would be, to me, the time to have the discussion, or sooner. You know, maybe they need some other equipment, or that needs to come in here, I don't know what, but,
And I apologize, I can't speak to the county system at any level.
Counselor Lippman, did you have?
Actually, this point I wanted to bring
Oh.
up. Thank you.
okay. And I have one more thing. What I would like to do is, I'd like to direct the city manager to reduce the salary portion of the fire department's budget by $300,000 without reducing any personnel. I would like to also repurpose the funds in this way, and I'd like to have council input, discussion, disagreement, whatever you like. Would be the $100,000 to the police department for a resource officer at the junior high school. $200,000 to the school department as part of the city's $500,000 commitment to the teacher's contract. So that's what I'd like to put on the table, and I would encourage any kind of discussion.
All right, so Counselor Hamel is proposing a $300,000 cut in the salary section of the Laconia Fire Department budget, and for that money to be repurposed, $100,000 to the Laconia Police Department budget for a school resource officer for the middle school, and $200,000 to the Laconia School District to be purposed as part of the $500,000 that was to be set aside for the reserve fund for teacher salaries.
I just clarify for my notes, if I could, please, then to $300,000 cut to salary-related items, but no reduction of personnel and positions. That was the
That's correct.
specific.
No
okay.
reductions
All right,
whatsoever.
I just want to make sure I have my notes correct here.
Yeah, and the $100,000 for the resource officer, that would be up to, if it costs less than whatever the cost would be.
Okay.
I would hope we'd still pursue some help from the schools for that position, but up to 100,000 of funds from the budget.
Yeah, I don't think we're fine tuning at this point. We're just
Correct. This
getting general direction. Anyone want to weigh in on that proposal? Counselor Cheney?
I just, I think there's some wisdom to the proposal, and I think we need to see the fine print, but I think several of us have looked at the budget long and hard and feel that the time has come to make some of these changes, and so I support it. I also like the idea of being able to help with the schools, and particularly help the police department with that resource officer.
Counselor Haynes, you want to weigh in?
Right now, I'd support a $100,000 cut to fund the resource officer. That's kind of where I am in that. I'd
Counselor
like to think about the
Osberg.
school, the $200,000.
Are you against moving it forward for further discussion?
No, absolutely not.
Okay. Counselor Lippman?
I think it's worth moving it forward for further discussion, sure.
All right, so we have a consensus there to move that forward as a,
You know, I don't think it's, I mean, I put it on the table tonight. We got till July 11th.
ninth, you were,
You're doing the same thing you're doing. July 9th, and, you know, the city manager could come up with something probably by that time, and, you know, to
Well, and I would assume that the fire chief and the manager would show us the impact that might have, those numbers. They ought to have some input, not auto, they've got to have some input. From my perspective, I hope that they see those funds should probably come out of overtime, because that's, in my mind, out of round. I think that's where the funds, but again, I'd like to hear from the chief and the manager on where they think those funds could come from.
Mr. Meyer?
So just at first blush, and just thinking out loud here, you do find fire-related salaries, I believe, in 3 different locations in the budget, one being the general fund for the fire budget, the second one being in the motorcycle week account, which is a special revenue account, and the third one being in the ambulance EMS special revenue account, correct? So adjusting $300,000 of funds, which if that's the charge of the council, I would certainly do, it would only be impacting the general fund, because the motorcycle week, if we were to make a reduction in overtime there, being a special revenue account, it isn't going to free up under your proposal, Councilor Hamel, of getting $300,000 to allocate to a resource officer in the school, and then the same thing on the ambulance account. So whatever dollars are in there certainly could stay and be available for fire department-related activities, but a $300,000 reduction in salary without reducing positions is definitely going to target overtime and probably the related retirement system costs that go along with it. So just putting that out there.
Councilor Lippman?
If you just visit the statement around the motorcycle week, if there's less, why would that have to be excluded from consideration? Because if his expense doesn't get charged to it, then that creates more available there, and we could repurpose something somewhere else.
We can, so you definitely could make reductions in any line item within the motorcycle week account, but where it's a special revenue account, at the end of the day, if revenue is higher than expenses, those revenues are staying in that account for a future allocation. They're not part of the general fund balance or flowing into it.
But we could make an advance allocation of some surplus in anticipation of a surplus based on reduced spending in there.
You could, I think
We've purchased.
Yeah, I don't think the numbers are as big there, so if you're looking in the proposed budget for the motorcycle week,
17,700.
yeah, the fire component is 17, and then you've got the retirement piece to it, so you might have $20,000 there. I also would caution that for the last couple of years, it's basically been a break-even scenario or slight deficits at the end of motorcycle week. So to count on any dollars, let alone some significant dollars, probably would not be something that staff or I would recommend at this point, because we've been running at break even or even in a deficit for a couple of years now, just because of declining vendor licenses for the most part.
So I can provide some numbers here for counselors to put this in perspective. There's under the salary area of the fire department budget, or budgets, as you pointed out, there's really 3. We all know, I think by now, that there's no specific line item there that says overtime, that it's a combination of 5 different lines that overtime accumulates in. So if you exclude holiday pay, which we are contractually obligated to pay, if you exclude that and add up the totals in the other 4 columns, the other 4 items that constitute, in effect, overtime, in the primary in the primary fire department budget, there's $255,000 of overtime in those 4 categories. In the EMS budget, there's another $119,000 of overtime in those 4 categories. And in the motorcycle week budget, there's $17,700 of overtime directed to the fire department in that budget. So you add those 3 together, and you get $391,700. of, of, uh, of overtime in those 4 line items in 3 different budgets. So it's just under $400,000. But as the manager noted, and as you all know, we pay a 32% state retirement system tax on all that money, $391,700. So our total tax on that is $125,344 on that overtime. So if you add all that together, you come up with $517,044. So that's a total of the salary lines from those 4 items plus the retirement tax. Totals up to $517,000, again, excluding the holiday pay line. So Counselor Hamel is suggesting that we take $300,000 out of that account and out of those line items in total and repurpose that $300,000. That would leave $217,044 left, again, not counting $120,000 of holiday pay. It would leave, in effect, in those categories, $217,044, if you want to make note of that, of which, but that's not salary that's left there, because that tax is figured into there as well. And the tax accounts for roughly a quarter of that total. So the actual amount that would be left in those 4 accounts in 3 different budgets would total about $165,000. So if Counselor Hamel's proposal is passed with the final passage of the budget, what would be left in the fire department budget or budgets for overtime would be $120,000 for holiday pay, which is what was proposed, and about approximately $164,000 in the other 4 overtime lines. So that's a total of $285,000 is what would be left in the budget for fire department overtime. I'll be happy, if you didn't catch all that, I'll be happy to go over that with you, but that's to put that in perspective.
I'd second Counselor Cheney's, we should ask the fire chief to be here to talk about that.
I'm sorry?
I would second what Counselor Cheney was saying with respect to having a discussion, have the chief come to, you talked about who should be here at the next meeting.
So would you like to have the chief here at the next meeting?
I'm supporting what Counselor Cheney had said. I think it would be good based on what you just described.
Okay. We got that. And so before we get off this subject, is there anybody else want to weigh in before we get off the fire department budget? Okay. So because I want to I want us to get everything out on the table tonight that can be put out on the table tonight. I think that obviously, as the city manager said, given that Counselor Hamel's motion targets the salary portion of the fire department budget without reduction of force, there's really only one place this money can come from cumulatively, and that's overtime and taxes on that overtime. And toward that end, I would like to see at the time that we pass the final budget, a resolution, an accompanying resolution, which would direct the fire chief to not backfill positions on the 9-person shift they consider a full shift for the platoons, not backfill below or above, 7 people. So what that means in plain English is that each platoon is scheduled to have 9 people work on a shift. And right now, and for years now, the policy has been that if one person doesn't show up for work, they bring somebody in on overtime to fill that 9th position as a matter of structure. And if 2 people are out, they bring 2 people in to get back to 9 for that shift. And what I'm proposing is giving direction to the fire department, and we've talked about this on the council for years, to say that our directive would be that in order to accomplish the savings that Councilor Hamel is asking for here, that the policy change to where if 7 people show up on a shift, we roll with 7 people on that shift. If 6 show up, he would have the ability to backfill to get it back up to 7. If 5 show up, he'd have the ability again to get it back to 7 people. But if 7, 8, or 9 show up, we roll with the people that show up. So there's no change to the full staffing of the shifts. That's 9 people. It's simply saying we're not going to backfill. And then the other part of that would be to say that, and the chief's hands are largely tied in this area by the collective bargaining agreement. And I have with me tonight copies, which I'll be happy to give to each of you, of the language in the collective bargaining agreement that dictates what can be done and can't be done. But the chief is under, so the issue is if 6 show up for a shift, firefighters, and there's a need to backfill that position, to backfill to get it back to 7, his hands are very much tied in who he can bring in to fill that position. In other words, he cannot do what a lot of other departments do, and that is call in an off-duty firefighter from another department, a certified firefighter, EMT, paramedic, whatever, from another fire department in the area, Belmont, wherever, and have that person fill that shift at regular pay as opposed to overtime. There's a little of that he can do under the terms of the collective bargaining agreement, but pretty much he's required to fill those backfill positions with people who are already on our payroll, and we have to pay them time and a half. So there's a significant extra expense there as well, plus the 32% tax we have to pay on that difference as well. So anyway, that's what I would like to see as an accompaniment to Councilor Hamel's proposal. Councilor Whitlam.
So I have a question, and this kind of pertains to needing to have the chief, is having watched issues over the generations here of, I think another sort of principle is that we don't want any, typically the Weirs has been used as the place where they would cut service. I think what we're asking for a service here in terms of response is not to, I want to see a proposal that continues to provide the same coverage to the Weirs. I'm concerned about that becomes the place. It's sort of like the Lakeport Library issue when the library was looking for financing that. So I think we're looking for balanced service. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Well, that would certainly be up to the chief in terms of what he thought appropriate staffing was. Up until 2-3 years ago, they staffed the Weir station with 2, I think, right? And now it's 3.
Yes. If they were down to 7, could they staff?
I'm assuming it would go back to 2, but that's not my call. Yeah.
We can certainly ask that question at the next meeting, Henry. And I agree, that's an area that needs to be pursued.
I mean, we have to, in good faith, assume that the chief is going to do what he thinks is best for the overall city, including every section of the city.
I guess we want a constructive dialogue on this, not one where we just, so we can accomplish this by doing something that we can't accept, right? That's not what we're looking for as a proposal, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm saying we're looking for a constructive proposal to the concerns that have been put on the table by Councilor Hamel, the options that put on Councilor Hamel, but we're not looking for something that comes back and says, I'm closing the weirs as an option to satisfy the 300,000.
Well, you know, again, I think we have to act on good faith. I think that there's a presumption on my part that the chief wouldn't do that. You know, he's not operating in a vacuum, regardless of what the you know.
I guess I just want to make it clear that that's not the kind of thing we're expecting to come back, right?
I agree with that.
I would agree. Not closing the weirs is an option.
I'm sorry?
Closing the weirs is not an option.
Yeah, so that could be part of the,
Yeah.
that could be part of the resolution, that closing the weirs is not an option. Certainly. So, any other comments on moving that idea of that resolution forward to the next step?
So I have no issue with bringing it forward and having the discussion. We have two meetings to consider. We have next meeting and then the July 9th meeting, right?
Yes. Anyone object to it being brought forward?
Nope.
Okay, so that, we'll need to draft that up as well. Okay. All right, what else? Anything? Everybody's happy?
Well,
Not sure happy's the word I was thinking.
Content?
You know, I've got one other comment.
Okay. Counselor Hamel.
You know, we just went through 10 or 12 public hearings. This is a $70 million budget. And we went through the public hearings for that $70 million budget. And luckily, we had one person that took the time to come in. So it's like that almost every year.
Careful what you wish for.
No, love to have comment.
Just one housekeeping issue on the public hearing that we had tonight for the anticipated grants. You know, Donna has reminded me that we had two recently that you had the first reading on last week for the two CDBG applications that we were not aware of when we put the budget together. So we would just be amending the numbers and bring you a revised budget resolution for that to reflect that, should they be approved at your meeting next week, and you would just substitute that in the whole on the night that you do the budget adoption. So it's more housekeeping in nature, but we will need to revise that one to reflect that $500,000 if it moves forward.
Okay, so we'll move on to, so this will be on the agenda for our meeting next Monday night. Any other business that may come before the council tonight? Any council comments? If not, I will declare this meeting adjourned at 8:13 with a reminder that we are going to meet in a non-meeting format as soon as our guests leave. Thank you.